What if I told you that your own government has spent decades trying to crack the code of your mind? That behind closed doors, scientists have subjected innocent people to psychological torture, memory erasure, and behavioral modification in the name of national security? Tonight, we're diving into 7 classified programs that turned human beings into unwilling test subjects in the most disturbing mind control experiments ever conducted. Fair warning, what you're about to hear will forever change how you view the people in power. What if the most horrifying science fiction experiments weren't fiction at all, but carefully documented programs conducted in the shadows of American institutions? In 1953, deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the Central Intelligence Agency, a man named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was handed an extraordinary mandate. The Cold War was escalating, and the agency believed the Soviets had unlocked the secrets of mind control. America, they decided, could not afford to fall behind. Thus began Mech Ultra, a program so vast and secretive that it would eventually encompass over 150 subprojects, reaching into more than 80 institutions across the country, hospitals, universities, psychiatric facilities, places where people came seeking help, not knowing they would become unwitting test subjects. The methods employed were as varied as they were disturbing. Patients and volunteers, often without their knowledge or consent, were dosed with LSD and other psychoactive drugs. They were subjected to weeks of sensory deprivation, locked away in darkness and silence until their grip on reality began to slip. Electroshock therapy, hypnosis, and psychological torture became tools in an arsenal designed not to heal, but to shatter the human mind and rebuild it according to the agency's specifications. The program's reach extended even into its own ranks. Frank Olson, a CIA scientist working on biological warfare projects, became an unwitting subject when his colleagues secretly slipped LSD into his drink during a 1953 retreat. Days later, Olson plunged to his death from the 13th floor of a New York hotel. The agency called it suicide, but Olson's family would spend decades fighting for the truth, uncovering layers of deception that suggested something far more sinister had occurred that November night. Perhaps nowhere were MK Ultra's experiments more systematic and devastating than at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute. Under the direction of Dr. Ewan Cameron, patients seeking treatment for depression and anxiety found themselves subjected to a process called psychic driving. Their memories were systematically erased through massive doses of electroshock therapy and drug-induced comas lasting weeks. When they finally awoke, they had been reduced to blank slates, unable to recognize their own families, stripped of their identities, their personalities rebuilt from nothing according to Cameron's twisted vision of mental health. In 1973, as congressional investigations began closing in, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decision that would echo through the decades. He ordered the destruction of virtually all MK Ultra records, boxes upon boxes of documents detailing 20 years of human experimentation simply vanished into shredders and incinerators. With them went any hope countless victims might have had of understanding what had been done to them or of finding justice for the violation of their minds and bodies. Today, the full scope of Mech Ultra remains buried beneath layers of destroyed evidence and classified files. How many people were subjected to these experiments? How many institutions participated? And perhaps most chilling of all, what discoveries were made in those shadowy laboratories that we may never know about? What if the perfect assassin could be created in a laboratory programmed to kill without question, then forget they ever pulled the trigger? In the shadowed corridors of Cold War intelligence, the CIA embarked on one of its most disturbing ventures, Project Artichoke. This classified program pushed the boundaries of human psychology to their breaking point, seeking to achieve what seemed impossible, forcing subjects to commit acts against their own will through a calculated blend of hypnosis, drugs, and psychological manipulation. The goal was as ambitious as it was chilling: to create human weapons who could be activated on command. The most haunting aspect of Artichoke was its ultimate objective: the creation of programmed assassins who would carry out their missions with mechanical precision, then return to their normal lives with no memory of what they had done. These weren't the fantasies of pulp fiction, but serious experiments conducted by trained scientists who believed they could rewire the human mind like a computer program. The implications were staggering: a killer who couldn't confess because they genuinely didn't remember. A perfect crime was a perfect cover. To achieve this terrifying vision, researchers employed electroshock therapy combined with carefully crafted drug cocktails designed to shatter the barriers of personality itself. Subjects were systematically broken down, their sense of self dissolved in a chemical haze, their minds made malleable for the implantation of false memories and artificial motivations. The process was methodical, clinical, and utterly ruthless in its disregard for human dignity. The test subjects for these experiments were society's most vulnerable: prisoners with no legal recourse, mental patients whose complaints would be dismissed as delusion, and foreign nationals whose disappearance would raise few questions. These individuals became unwilling participants in a program that treated human consciousness as nothing more than raw material for experimentation. Their consent was never sought because it was never considered necessary. Perhaps most disturbing of all, declassified documents suggest that Artichoke achieved some measure of success. Reports indicate the successful creation of multiple personalities within subjects, artificial personas that could be triggered and controlled independently of the host's primary consciousness. These fragmentary records raise a question that lingers in the classified shadows of intelligence history. If such techniques were perfected decades ago, how might they be employed today? The files on Project Artichoke remain heavily redacted, their darkest secrets still buried in government vaults. But in a world where the line between science fiction and classified reality grows ever thinner, one has to wonder, are there people walking among us right now who don't remember what they've been programmed to do? In the shadow of America's most vibrant cities, behind the doors of seemingly ordinary apartments, the CIA conducted some of its most disturbing experiments on the human mind. The year was 1953, when federal narcotics agent George Hunter White received an unusual assignment. Working under the CIA's broader MK-Ultra program, White was tasked with recruiting an unlikely team of operatives, prostitutes who would unknowingly serve as instruments of psychological warfare. These women were trained to slip LSD and other mind-altering substances into the drinks of unsuspecting clients, transforming intimate encounters into covert laboratory sessions. The operations theaters were carefully constructed stages of deception. In San Francisco and New York, the CIA established a network of brothels disguised as ordinary apartments. Behind their walls lay a sinister infrastructure: one-way mirrors that allowed researchers to observe without being seen, recording devices that captured every word, and cameras that documented the subject's descent into altered states of consciousness. The clients, believing they were engaging in a simple transaction, had no idea they were becoming unwilling participants in government experiments. For nearly a decade, Operation Midnight Climax operated with complete impunity. Those conducting these illegal activities enjoyed absolute immunity from prosecution, allowing them to push ethical boundaries without fear of consequence. The operation's reach extended far beyond random encounters, deliberately targeting individuals of strategic importance: wealthy businessmen whose secrets could prove valuable, foreign diplomats whose loyalties might be questioned, and government officials whose positions made them potential assets or threats. The true purpose became clear through the meticulous documentation. This wasn't merely about testing the effects of psychoactive drugs on human behavior, though that data proved invaluable. The CIA was perfecting techniques of blackmail and coercion, learning how compromising situations could be engineered and leveraged. They were mapping the vulnerabilities of the human psyche, discovering how altered states could make individuals susceptible to manipulation and control. When Operation Midnight Climax finally ended, its files were largely destroyed, leaving behind only fragments of a program that violated every principle of informed consent and human dignity. But one question lingers in the spaces between the redacted documents and classified testimonies. If this is what they were willing to reveal about their past, What experiments might still be hidden in the shadows of today? What if everything that makes you who you are, your memories, your personality, your very sense of self, could be erased and rewritten like a computer program? In the sterile halls of Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute during the 1950s and 60s, patients arrived seeking help for common ailments, anxiety, depression, the ordinary struggles of the human mind. They trusted Dr. Ewan Cameron, a respected psychiatrist whose reputation stretched across continents. What they didn't know was that behind the clinical facade, Cameron was conducting experiments that would strip away the very essence of who they were. With funding secretly channeled through CIA front organizations, Cameron subjected his patients to a process he called psychic driving. For weeks on end, patients were held in drug-induced comas while speakers placed beside their heads repeated the same audio messages hundreds, sometimes thousands of times. The goal was not healing, it was complete psychological demolition. Cameron believed that to cure mental illness, he first had to destroy the existing personality entirely, then rebuild it from scratch with new identities and belief systems. His patients became unwilling subjects in a grotesque experiment in human reconstruction. When they finally emerged from their chemically induced sleep, they were hollow shells of their former selves. The results were devastating beyond imagination. Mothers forgot their children's names, their faces becoming strangers. Decades of memories simply vanished, first loves, wedding days, the birth of children, all erased as if they had never existed. Some patients had to relearn the most basic human functions: how to walk, how to speak, even how to use the toilet. They were adults reduced to the mental state of infants, their minds wiped clean by a man who believed he was playing God. Years later, the Canadian government would pay millions in settlements to Cameron's victims, a quiet acknowledgement of the horrors that had been inflicted. But the CIA's involvement remained buried in classified files for decades, a shadow operation that treated human consciousness as nothing more than raw material for experimentation. As we close another chapter on the darkest corners of psychiatric history, one question lingers in the sterile air of that Montreal Institute. If the mind can be so completely erased and rewritten, what does that say about the nature of human identity itself? What if you could create the perfect spy, one who carried out missions without knowing they were doing so, whose memories could be erased like words from a chalkboard? In the shadowy corridors of the early CIA, Project Bluebird emerged as one of the agency's most disturbing endeavors. Born from Cold War paranoia, this program pursued a chilling objective: to create agents who could withstand the most brutal interrogations while simultaneously becoming unwitting instruments of espionage. The goal wasn't simply to train operatives, it was to fundamentally rewire the human mind itself. The methods employed were as ruthless as they were experimental. CIA researchers combined hypnosis with electroshock, therapy, and powerful drugs, attempting to fragment personalities and forge controllable alternate identities within a single mind. They sought to compartmentalize memories, creating mental barriers so absolute that one part of a person's consciousness could remain completely hidden from another. The human subjects became living laboratories for the manipulation of identity itself. Korean War prisoners of war became unwilling test subjects, along with suspected double agents who disappeared into CIA black sites. Researchers probed the limits of mental resistance, studying how communist interrogators broke down American soldiers, then attempting to reverse engineer those techniques. They wanted to understand not just how minds could be shattered, but how they could be rebuilt according to their specifications. As the experiments progressed, scientists developed sophisticated truth serums and interrogation methods, designed to bypass conscious mental defenses entirely. They discovered ways to access memories and implant suggestions that subjects would never consciously recall receiving. The program showed disturbing promise in creating dissociative states, fractures in the mind where multiple personalities could coexist, unaware of each other's existence. Project Bluebird's techniques proved so effective at fragmenting human consciousness that it evolved into the infamous MK-Ultra program, expanding its reach into universities, hospitals, and psychiatric institutions across North America. The perfect spy, it seemed, was not someone trained to keep secrets, but someone who didn't even know they had them. How many sleeper agents walk among us today, their true purpose buried so deep in their fractured minds that even they remain unaware of what they might be programmed to do? Imagine falling asleep in a hospital bed trusting that when you wake, you'll be healed. Now imagine waking up weeks later, unable to remember your own name. In psychiatric facilities across North America, something unspeakable was happening behind locked doors. Patients who had checked in seeking help for depression, anxiety, or minor psychiatric conditions found themselves trapped in what would become known as the sleep room. Here, vulnerable individuals were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks at a time, their unconscious minds subjected to endless loops of recorded messages designed to break down their very sense of self. The cocktail of chemicals pumped into their veins was staggering. Massive doses of insulin sent patients into hypoglycemic shock. Barbiturates kept them suspended in artificial sleep. Experimental drugs, untested and dangerous, coursed through their systems day after day. Many would never recover from the neurological damage. Their brains, starved and poisoned, bore permanent scars that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, desperate families waited in hospital corridors, told their loved ones were receiving revolutionary treatment. The doctors spoke of breakthroughs, of cutting-edge therapy that would restore their family members to perfect mental health. They had no idea their relatives had become unwilling subjects in classified experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. Those who eventually emerged from the sleep room were hollow shells of their former selves. Survivors described waking up as strangers to themselves, their personalities completely rewritten. Childhood memories had been erased. The ability to form new memories was damaged or destroyed entirely. Husbands forgot their wives, mothers couldn't recognize their children. They had become living ghosts, their past lives as unreachable as a half-remembered dream. The medical staff who witnessed these horrors found themselves trapped in a web of silence. Those who dared question the procedures faced threats of career destruction, professional ruin, and worse. The conspiracy of silence stretched from orderlies to administrators, creating an impenetrable wall around the sleep room's darkest secrets. The sleep room eventually closed its doors, but the questions it left behind remain as haunting as ever. How many facilities conducted similar experiments? How many patients disappeared into induced sleep, never to truly wake again? And perhaps most chilling of all, what other rooms in what other hospitals might still be operating in the shadows today? What happens when a government turns the tools of war against the minds of its own people? When psychological warfare becomes domestic policy? In the shadows of American intelligence, a program emerged that would redefine the boundaries between protection and persecution. COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program, wasn't content with simple surveillance. Instead, it pioneered something far more insidious: the systematic psychological destruction of American citizens whose only crime was speaking out against the status quo. The program's architects understood that the human mind, when properly manipulated, could become its own prison. They deployed networks of informants who didn't just gather information. They sowed seeds of paranoia and mistrust within activist organizations. Fake correspondents appeared, designed to turn allies against each other. Staged events were orchestrated to make targets question their own reality. The goal wasn't merely to monitor dissidents, it was to drive them to the breaking point, to depression, and in some cases, to suicide. Perhaps no case illustrates this psychological warfare more chillingly than the campaign against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The civil rights leader found himself the target of an intensive pressure operation that included anonymous threatening letters, one of which suggested he take his own life before receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. The FBI had weaponized shame, fear, and isolation, turning them into instruments of control, as precise as any physical weapon. COINTELPRO's methods drew from the darkest corners of mind control research, applying psychiatric manipulation techniques to fracture movements from within. Character assassination became an art form. Reputations were destroyed not through public trials, but through whisper campaigns and manufactured scandals. Leaders watched helplessly as their organizations crumbled, never fully understanding that their paranoia and mistrust weren't symptoms of stress, but the intended outcome of a deliberate campaign. The program was officially disbanded in 1971, its existence exposed through stolen documents. Yet questions linger in the silence that followed. If the government was willing to wage war on the minds of its own citizens, then what psychological operations might exist today, hidden behind classified walls and digital shadows? Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found this video interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos.